Hello. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all here. I'm Martin, the Chief Product Officer at Checkmk. And I'm delighted to kick off our first day with the first talk. Today's talks will focus on Checkmk 2.4. And in this talk, we'll give you an overview of everything which is to come. Let's get started and explore Checkmk 2.4 together. When we think about Checkmk 2.4 or about Checkmk about a new release, what describes a new release of Checkmk? It's the Werks. A Werk is a user-facing change. And we start with a little exercise, actually, for all of you, that we try to guess how many Werks are in Checkmk 2.4. If you think Checkmk 2.4 has more than 500 Werks, please raise your hand now. I want to see some more hands. If you think it has more than 750 Werks, please keep your hand up. More than 1,000. More than 1,250, keep your hands up. Okay, not so many. You're all winners, yeah? Because it's actually 1,325 Werks. And now, who of you has read all 1,325 Werks? No one? Okay, no one, except me. I guess it's my job to do so. Thanks. And I thought maybe I make it a little bit easier for you so that you don't have to read the 1,325 Werks, and I break that down for you. And that we think about what are these Werks, what are all of them? And if we paint that in a pie chart, we see actually most of them are fixes. And only a few of them are actual features. But the important thing, these are Werks, and Werks are not work. If you think about it, how much time we spend into stuff, then it looks more like that. Most of our time goes into new features, but they don't get that many Werks. But there's one exception. Don't know if you can see that little yellow thing. And that happens every release. Every release, there's one Werk or two Werks. And if you can't see it here, I put an arrow there. There's one Werk which is special. And it comes from that handsome gentleman. Who of you knows this person? Okay, some of you know him, yeah? That's Lars. Lars is our CTO, first employee at Checkmk. And the thing is, with his Werk, it causes a lot of work. And it always starts like that. He writes to me, hey, I played a little bit around with Checkmk, and I have this really nice thing. Take a look at that. It really has to end up in Checkmk 2.4. And I mean, it's just a POC, but we need to get it done. And I think a couple of things around that. The one thing is, when did he write that? He wrote it end of October. And that is important because when do we do our entire development? We typically start in May and try to finish up in December. And if someone comes in October to me and says, I have this really cool thing, it's a lot of pain for me. Because I come to the conference and they talk to you about, this is our roadmap, this is everything that you want to do. And I say, we cannot make, I cannot get your things in because the roadmap is already full, right? And then Lars comes around. And especially so late, but I said, I mean, I looked at it and I was like, we need to get that into Checkmk 2.4. I agreed with him. And so what happened? We immediately put a developer on work. And it took us 1 month to get that POC into something properly working. But that was just the beginning. We needed actually until February to polish that, because it was such a fundamental change to Checkmk with so much impact that we actually had to put quite a lot of time into that. And I want to thank the 2 colleagues who worked a lot on that, because this really makes a big change. Now you might be curious, what is that? What is Martin talking about? And it's about that. It's about performance. And I have a video for you that you can watch and look at it for yourself and see for yourself what it's about. So we already done in Checkmk 2.4, 2.3. Yeah, you can clap because it's nice, right? It's still running, right? Crazy. Takes so much time to just add a host, do service discovery, and activate changes. And I broke that down now into what it actually is. So the service discovery in 2.4 is 2.8 times faster. Activate changes is 2.4 times faster. And here, parameters of the service, something people have asked for a long time that it gets faster, is 3.8 times faster. But even stuff like man pages, it's crazy. To load a man page takes 3 seconds before, and now it only takes 1 second. Still a lot of time, but much faster. Baking agents, even that is faster now. And then the most important piece, adding 8 services manually is 4.4 times faster. And why is that important? Because you can finally do this. Crazy, right? You don't have to wait anymore until it's not grayed out anymore. And you know why this is important? Because there are a lot of users out there who don't know that the accept all or monitor undecided services button exists. So we actually saw people who clicked plus on every little service. And imagine how they were getting angry with Checkmk. And now you can actually do that now. You shouldn't, but you can. So what is it? It's the new automation helpers. And the new automation helpers, they will help you on larger sites to get a performance boost, but especially on smaller sites, you will really see that. And how does that work? There's a continuously running process now in Checkmk. Actually, it's not 1, it's at least 3. And now come the bad news, the big but. Yeah? And the big but is that it will cost you something. It will not cost you money, which you have to pay to us. It will be available in all Checkmk editions. But it costs you memory. And each process in my test system, 200 megabytes each. And now you might be, oh shit, you have to upgrade all your servers now. But I have also good news. This is our internal IT monitoring at Checkmk. And you can see the difference before after. It actually uses less memory. But as a lawyer would say, it depends. So on this system, it's less. On my test system, it looks like this. We have exactly 600 megabytes, right? So you really have to try it out for yourself to see what is the impact. It could be more, it could be less. It will really depend how your IT setup is and what your monitoring does. So what about CPU? Because memory, we don't know, will it get better or worse? Nobody knows until you do it. We improved CPU usage as part of that. And take a look at this comparison, 2.3 versus 2.4. In my test system, it actually needs 20% less CPU now. And I think the thing that you will recognize is that's much more spiky. That's because things get done much faster. That's why the stuff in the UI is much faster, because we get things done much faster. And these are basically 2 identical systems. They both have 400 hosts, around 4,000 services, 4 cores only. And they're monitoring a very dynamic Kubernetes cluster. And now you can actually see when my colleagues are working. So I do know when you're working because then my monitoring tells me that. And you might be wondering, okay, talking about Kubernetes, you can do that. Can you do that now? And if you've ever wanted to monitor a Kubernetes cluster with pods changing every minute, or if you have ever wanted to add hundreds of hosts to Checkmk, and that reliably, then I have good news. This is my proof point. Adding 600 hosts instantly, no problem anymore. You can also do larger number of hosts. You can see, created 615 hosts, did a service discovery on that 615 hosts, activate changes in 1 minute. And what about smaller changes? All of these changes were done in less than 4 seconds. Each line is a change. It could be a lot of hosts, could be only a number of hosts. But that's including activate changes on my system. But what is it what I'm showing to you right now? It's our dynamic configuration. And the dynamic host management is one of the features which we completely reworked as part of Checkmk 2.4. And what is it about? It's about typically piggyback hosts. So if you, for example, monitor vSphere, all the VMs and the ESXi can be piggyback hosts. If you monitor Kubernetes, everything is a piggyback host. If you monitor something in the cloud, almost everything is also a piggyback host. And so what do we do? What does the dynamic host management do? It consists of connectors, and each connector starts with collecting piggyback data across sites, then calculating the changes, creating, modifying, deleting hosts, a service discovery, and in the end, activate changes. And in 2.3, the dynamic host management was a sum of all connectors. And you might wonder, what is now the problem? Because, I mean, is it just performance? It's actually much more. Because just imagine you have 5 connectors doing this all the time. And these things happen concurrently. And at some point, they meet a bulk service discovery. And that's where it meets basically parallel processing meets concurrency. So all the 5 things, they run in parallel, the connectors, but at some point we have these things inside Checkmk which can only run once at a time, like a bulk service discovery, and also activate changes as a global action. And so you will basically at that point, essentially at some point run into a crash or into a traffic jam. And what's the solution to that? It's quite simple. We just decouple the connectors from the configuration changes. And that's how it works. So we have connector threads, we have a processing publishing zone, we have stuff which is talking. This is very complicated, but we don't need to look at it because I made it so that I also understand it. It's like that now. So very simple. We still have all the connectors, but they only collect data now. And then we have one chain which has all the configuration changes. And that is now very, very fast. And as a consequence, it looks like that. So we have a new hub for dynamic host management. The connectors are still there in the bottom, so the familiar thing. And now we have on top the cycles. And they do the processing. We can then see what is actually happening. And as a consequence, with that change, it's now really stable. I couldn't break it anymore. No matter how much load I put into it, it still always worked reliably. So it's very stable. It's now also very fast because we are utilizing the incremental activation feature, which we introduced in Checkmk 2.0, now fully. That's why activate changes is so damn quick with the dynamic host management. And lastly, for you, what do you need to do? The good thing is almost nothing. So it will be a smooth update experience for that. Because there's only one thing which you might have to do, and that is if you have that option set, that option has moved somewhere else now. It's also my reminder to say, I mean, what am I here to talk to you about? Yeah, what should I do? I'm here to talk about Checkmk 2.4 at a glance, right? And for that, I mean, I only talked about 2 things now, but there's much more. And we have, I like frameworks a lot. So I drew this picture. to describe what is important for us and what did we try to achieve with Checkmk 2.4 and what did we focus on. And that is, on the one hand side, we want to be able to monitor anything. Then, with a powerful configuration, the ability to alert and analyze data, supported by a great user experience and extensible interfaces, running on a scalable and secure platform. And what we talked about mostly was this platform now. But there's more to that than what we already showed. And we'll start in the afternoon with Moritz. We'll talk about Piggyback. And you have no idea what Piggyback is about and what this means, what distributed Piggyback means. Please listen to his talk later on. And I spoke now about some things, and I think I mentioned scalable and secure, so we should probably also talk about security. And the first thing we talk about, you will be wondering, what does that have to do with security? It's the automation user. And it's rather the infamous automation user because it's the bane of our support engineers. Because what do users do? They delete it. Because it's there and you can't just delete it, right? And as a consequence, stuff in Checkmk doesn't work anymore because inside Checkmk, we depend on the automation user. So what options do we have? We either stop users from deleting the automation user or we just delete it ourselves. And from Checkmk 2.4 on, the built-in automation user is gone. It's only on fresh sites, so if you update, you don't have to worry, it's still there. And if you're interested, please read the Werk. It contains a lot of details which are relevant for you when you go to 2.4 and when you want to get rid of the automation user. And now you might be wondering, okay, now he's talking about security. What does that have to do with security? Our security team was actually responsible for getting rid of the automation user. They were very much pushing for that. And they were pushing for that because the secret for the automation user is actually stored in clear text on disk. And that's, of course, not desirable. So that's the reason why we actually started working getting rid of it. It required a lot of changes, but now it's gone. You can still create automation users, and you can even create them with the secret stored in clear text, but that's not a default option. That's something you need to do explicitly if you need that and want that. So let's talk about stuff which is more security related, probably. Security warnings. We now have the feature that if someone changed your password in Checkmk, you will get a notification, a security warning. And also if some other security things happen inside Checkmk. And they are typically sent out by mail if possible, but if not, we use personal messages. Who of you knows personal messages in Checkmk? Okay, probably I see around 5 hands. 6 hands? I also didn't know about it, and that's actually the reason why I'm presenting this feature today, because it's a cool feature which no one knows about. And that is that you can get these things inside Checkmk. And if there's one thing which I want that you take home from the conference, is that you can do stuff like that. That you can actually annoy your colleagues by sending them user messages in Checkmk. Okay. So a small change, of another small change. But sometimes these small changes make a big impact. And that's that you can now enforce two-factor authentication. When we initially built it, we said, okay, I mean, we just put it there and then we see and it should be fine, right? And then users started using it and then their IT security teams came, you need to be able to enforce it. People can just deactivate it, right? And therefore, we took that feedback in and said, okay, let's try to enforce it now. And how can you enforce it? In 2 ways. Either globally, so for all users, or you can just say, for certain groups of users per role, you can also enforce it. But that's not all what our security team is doing. If you want to actually know what they're really doing, we have a dedicated talk at 5:30 today by Hannes, who will go into a lot of the things around vulnerabilities with Checkmk. So we talked about the platform. Let's move on to the thing which is probably most relevant to most of you is, what can you monitor new in our Checkmk 2.4? And Jan already highlighted that. And that's the ability that you can do stuff like that now. And why is that so special? Because on the one hand side, we get the ability that we can monitor performance metrics of applications, like infrastructure performance, but we also get business metrics out of it. You can combine it with logs. So for example, to see what kind of recommendations were sent out by your web shop, by your microservices web shop, and also what kind of ads were sent out. So every functionality of a modern application you can monitor now. But you might be wondering, I mean, isn't that already possible anyway? Aren't you already doing that maybe? And the thing is, with Checkmk, what we do is we primarily monitor business applications. These are the things here. You can also use a lot of active checks to go a lot more in depth. But these are applications which are not your software. These are business applications, out-of-the-box software. But what about the custom applications which you and your company might be building? What about them? How do you monitor these things? And for the business applications, we have our built-in plugins. For your own software, you can write custom plugins, and probably most of you use local checks. And there have been some changes in the industry over the last years which do a fundamental change to that, and that's standardization. And that came on the one hand side by Prometheus, because a lot of applications support Prometheus out of the box. They expose Prometheus metrics and also OpenTelemetry. So it's the standard for observability, for metrics, logs, and traces, for instrumenting, generating, collecting, and exporting telemetry. And that's actually great for you because it makes application monitoring much, much easier for you. And the most important thing, it's also much simpler for us now because there's one standard on which we can rely on. And therefore, we said we have to integrate OpenTelemetry into Checkmk. How does that work? We have a Checkmk server. On that, we have an OpenTelemetry collector running. That can, from applications, pull data if they have a metrics endpoint. But you can also push data to it via OpenTelemetry. And you can also build cascading collectors. So you say, hey, I don't want my application to directly talk to Checkmk. I do it via another collector, which then pushes all the information forward. And then inside our collector, we basically just dump it out in JSON files. We have a special agent which grabs that data and then can generate services, simple services, to be honest. Services on business metrics, on middleware like Kafka, on Go applications, also on JVM, and all that out of the box. So you don't have to write actually any code anymore to get these insights into applications. So that in the end, you can do stuff like that you can really get insights into applications from all different angles. And that is experimental. What does experimental mean? It was one of the deals we had to do with our developers when we built that feature. Because they said, if you want to do it right, we will have to do fundamental changes throughout this year as well. And that is what experimental means. It means we will do a lot of changes to that feature. And we have the freedom to make these changes, and we do not have to ensure migration between before and after. Because that is always a very cost-intensive action if we have to migrate existing functionality to new functionality and have to ensure that. And that's why it's experimental, so you can use it, but you can be quite sure that for Checkmk 2.5, and maybe even during Checkmk 2.4, we will make changes to that feature to make it better. Now, let's talk about not only the application stuff, but also about infrastructure. And every year, we also ask our IT team, what do you wish? What plugin would you like to have in Checkmk? And they said, can we have that in Checkmk? Yeah, Robert, thank you. And they said that because we already have Ceph monitoring in Checkmk, but they said, Robert's is much, much better. We need Robert's. Yeah? And therefore, with the help from Robert, we mainlined it into Checkmk. And therefore, you get now Ceph monitoring. Thanks, Robert. You get a lot more insights around Ceph and Checkmk. That's not the only thing we did in that regard. We also said, what are features which we need to polish, which we need to refine? And in Checkmk 2.3, we introduced the completely new check HTTP and a certificate check. And we took the time in the last months to refine that, to add a lot of features to it, to make it much, much better. And so you have a couple of new features, like, for example, you can now finally connect to an explicit server. You can ignore certificates if you want to. You can enforce IPv4, IPv6. And for a certificate check, it finally has a proper service summary, proper service details, proper graphs, so that you can then use it in your alerts and you can finally know, okay, all the information which you actually wanted in that. And along with that comes a lot of macro support for a lot of different things, so that you can build simpler rules. And coming to simpler rules, we also have now a tool inside Checkmk 2.4 with which you can migrate existing rules from the old HTTP check over to the new one. And this is supposed to be a help for you. It's not it can do everything, because rules can be really, really complex. But what we aimed for is that we can solve 80% of use cases. So that when you use it, stuff which can be migrated certainly will get migrated, and the things which we can't, they won't get migrated. And we will also not enhance it further, because it's basically impossible. So it's a service for you, for the ones who have not migrated yet, because, I mean, it's some work to do it. It's a helper thing. But I would say, take it as an opportunity as well to rethink, because the new HTTP check is much more powerful, has a lot more options, and you can simplify a lot of the existing rules into a few less rules. And therefore use it as an opportunity if you have the time and the capacity in your organization. Besides that, we did a lot of other things. Always have the logo wall with me. And out of the 1,325 works, more than 500 are actually fixes, improvements, new plugins in the area of monitoring plugins. Can't get too much into detail there, because then we would need the entire day. But that's where you can basically use our work search engine to find out what actually exactly changed, and you probably know best what kind of IT you have. We have one more thing, and that's tomorrow we have a talk about one feature which we mainlined in Checkmk 2.4. Took us actually quite some time, because the person who wrote that wrote a massive piece of code. I think Moritz needed 3 weeks to mainline it. Yes, thanks, Andreas. And so we have Andreas tomorrow, and Andreas is going to share us about how you can monitor service via Redfish. Because from Checkmk 2.4 on, that's built into Checkmk. You don't have to download MKPs anymore. We maintain it. I mean, still Andreas does a lot of the work, you know, but we take care that it's in the product, and you don't have to do anything anymore except updating Checkmk. We have another Andreas here. Also, a little bit of clap for Andreas, because he does a We have another Andreas, because we also worked on another topic. And that's if you've ever wanted to run the Checkmk agent as non-root, we have a lot of news for you. And we said we need a dedicated talk for that, so that you can see what we actually did in that regard. So now let's go into configuration. And for configuration, we did work on one feature which was requested by a lot of you. And that is around updating discovery parameters on the fly. And if you're not in the depth of Checkmk, you will be like, what is that? So I have to basically explain that a bit. If you have, for example, an interface, the first time we monitor that interface, we save the state the interface was in. For example, it was up. And then, when there's a change in the interface state, for example, it goes down, we create an alert. But this change in interface could be something which you actually did on purpose. I mean, maybe you don't need that port anymore. So what do you do then? How can you teach Checkmk that this down is actually the new OK? Before, what you had to do is remove the service and then add it again. especially with the long times it needed before, can be very painful. And now you just need one button, one click, because you can refresh them directly. And there's a new feature in the service discovery called changed services. And when you update to Checkmk 2.4, you'll probably see that in your discovery checks that some of your services have that. It doesn't create a warning or crit. It still stays OK, the Checkmk discovery check. But you can see that and then decide for yourself what you do with all these changed parameters. You can also use the bulk feature to do all the changes if you want. But it's now an option that you don't have to do so many clicks anymore. And you will also see what exactly changed. So if you click on the little thing there, you will see all the changed parameters. And then if you say, hey, actually this should always be down because it's actually not used anymore, that port, you get that again. And besides that feature, which is probably more for users who are a lot into Checkmk, because to discover that you need some time, we also worked on features which help users which are new to Checkmk. And always think about, I mean, most of you have been here for a long time, who know Checkmk really probably much better than I do. But you all will always have new colleagues who you have to onboard, and then imagine how they have to deal with Checkmk, how much fun that is. And therefore we said, let's also work a little bit on improving the life for these users. And the first talk after the lunch break will be on that. And it will be how you can, for example, set up cloud monitoring in minutes. And it introduces a new technology, which took us quite some time to convince a couple of people, like Matthias, that we can do that. And Bontek will introduce that later on. So let's talk about alerting, analytics, and together with that great user experience. Put it together in one bucket. And the first thing is a small change, which hopefully has quite some impact again, and that's we have our Grafana integration. Our Grafana integration is something which is developed by us. It's a Grafana data source. It's open source. It's available for free if you use the Grafana open source solution. However, if you use Grafana Cloud, you need an officially signed plugin. So that's only if you want, that's the only way how you can get stuff, how you can get data sources into Grafana Cloud. And we also have a plugin for that. That's also developed by us. It's also open source. It's actually almost the same thing, except that we give it to our Grafana that they sign it. And it used to be only available in Checkmk Cloud. And now it's different. Now it's available in all Checkmk editions. And there's a little but here as well. This can change any time, because we actually, as Checkmk, have to pay Grafana for this signing. And these commercial terms can always change, so we never know how it will be in 3 years. But for the next foreseeable time, it will be something available for free for all of you. And then there's one super large change in Checkmk 2.4, and one of the things where my heart started to shine the moment when we asked our IT people, the people who are most critical, who always complain about all the things which we do in Checkmk is the wrong stuff. You should do different things, like they don't agree with what we do, right? And actually one of our colleagues, he said to the person who worked on that, man, this is really cool. And what it's about is notifications. And we have a long talk in the afternoon which goes into everything which we did in that regard, because we really changed almost everything. As the last part for my talk, we go into interfaces. And interfaces for automation and development, and we start with our developer interfaces. With Checkmk 2.0, we introduced the agent-based API v1. And in 2.3, last year, we introduced version 2 of it. As part of that, we deprecated the old API. I think it's important to highlight that for 4 years, this was a stable API which had no change to it. And in 2.3, we also introduced a lot of other APIs which round up the entire experience around writing check plugins. So you can basically use stable documented APIs to write everything, to write rule sets, to create metrics and graphs, to do the server-side calls, so the stuff which basically is running in the background. And that is also now something which we expect to be stable for a long time. But it also means that you need to do something before you go to Checkmk 2.4. Before you go to Checkmk 2.4, you need to migrate over to these APIs, anything which you have custom. Because if you don't do that, you will have a really bad time. If you do it, you'll have a good time. We also have another API, the forgotten API, the Agent Bakery API. I always forget it. I think you don't, but I do. And that is something which has been around also since 2.0. It's going to stay around. We might at some point do a V2 version of that. Depends. We don't know yet when we'll do it at some point, but there's nothing to worry about for the time being. So these were the developer APIs. We also did APIs around automation. And this is our REST API. We added a couple of new endpoint families like the LDAP connection, the SAML connection endpoint group, and also the broker connection. And you have no idea what this is. In one of the talks in the afternoon, we'll talk about that. We also work, besides on new endpoint families, on making improvements to existing endpoints. And just picking a few of them which made an impact, at least for me. And that's the one thing is the activate changes endpoint, because you can now finally get the state per site as a result from the API. You can see what is the phase it was currently on, activate changes, and then you can use it much better in your automations. Another thing is that the enhanced bulk service discovery. So this is actually now working quite differently. You know, if you do a bulk service discovery call, it creates a job. The job goes into a queue. And then at some point, this job is being worked on whenever the queue is empty. And now we also worked on performance, because this was the juice behind the configuration steps in the dynamic host configuration. Because the dynamic host configuration is basically just an interface which does a lot of REST API calls internally. And they were the things which were actually quite slow. And so we said, OK, what endpoints are the most problematic ones from a performance perspective? And then we started working on them. And that was actually the hosts endpoint family. And we started first on the bulk update endpoint. And that's just simple. We just improved efficiency, making it faster. But there are also other ways how you can improve that, where you can now actually go into action. And that is, for example, for the show all hosts endpoint. You can now filter the results, because the less results Checkmk sends back to you and has to validate, the less time it takes. And so you can, for example, now just give a field to it and say, these are the fields that you need. For example, if you just want to know, show me all hosts, and I just want the host ID, you do that. And that is then 2.2 times faster, because not all the data has to be sent anymore. We also did something around what kind of host you get back or for which sites. So you can now specify, give me the details of these hosts, of all hosts from that specific site. And you can imagine how much that can improve the speed of the REST API, because you send much, much less data and maybe only the relevant data which you need. And I think we had this discussion every year, like the REST API is not as fast as the UI. And there's a main reason why the REST API is not so fast is because it does validation. It actually checks if the data which is being sent from the outside is valid, if the request is a proper request. But what it also does is, it checks if the Checkmk configuration is also valid, so that when you get a response from the API, it's a good response. It's a response with valid data. But what can happen is, if someone, can happen that people work directly on MK files, I've heard about that, and if someone does a change there which is not compliant with how the configuration should look like, then you have during runtime an error. And these things are not nice. So there's one thing which we did in that regard. That's we basically build a config validation layer. So a lot of config files, so the MK files, during an update, they go against the config validation layer. And then we will report, here are malformed MK files. We will not stop you in the update process. It's just a warning. At some point in the future, we might, however, stop the update process. So if you see these things, that means you have some broken configuration files. Take a look at these MK files and see what is broken and try to fix it, because at some point, it will shoot yourself in the foot with that if you don't do it. So I talked now about a lot of the changes. And you can see we did changes in almost any area in Checkmk. We always try to improve Checkmk in all these different dimensions. And that is what is Checkmk 2 for. And I hope this is an incentive for you that we go from these, I think, around 12%. Actually, 12% is quite good. I think you're quite, that's quite nice, especially when I've seen some of the bugs in the last couple of weeks. So very good. It will get better in the next weeks, for sure. So I hope this is no motivation that you go to Checkmk 2.4. And we have a lot of resources for you. So we have the standard management level communication. But for the first time, we also have release notes. And that's because I read through all of these works, and I said, these are the relevant works for you, which you should definitely see. These are description of the major features, so that after the conference, you can just tell your colleagues, instead of watching this entire presentation, they can just also read something. So these are the release notes, something new. We also have a blog article on the new notification hub. And if you want to migrate your HTTP checks, we also have a blog article which helps you in doing so. And then the most important article is the update to Checkmk version 2.4. It includes a lot of know-how, how to do an update, what things to look out for. So I really recommend reading that article. We put a lot of passion into that article to help you do that update.